The gymnasium fell silent in a way that had nothing to do with acoustics. 35 recruits stopped what they were doing, some mid-stretch, some mid-conversation. One man had been taping his wrists and simply forgot to finish. They all turned toward the center mat where Ryan Fletcher was lying flat on his back, staring up at the industrial ceiling lights with the expression of a man trying to remember his own name. Ryan Fletcher was 25 years old, 6 feet 3 inches, 215 pounds of athletic confidence built over a lifetime of being the biggest, fastest, strongest person in every room he had ever entered. He had played linebacker at Ohio State. He had trained for this tryout for 8 months. He had eaten the right foods, run the right miles, lifted the right weights, and walked into the State Police Training Center that afternoon with the quiet certainty of a man who already knew how the story ended. He was on the floor in 3 seconds. The man standing over him did not look like someone who should have been able to do that. Daniel Shaw was 36 years old, 5 feet 11, 175 pounds in his workout clothes, which were faded navy sweatpants, and a Marine's hoodie that had been through so many wash cycles, the letters across the chest had gone soft and gray. His running shoes came from a discount rack at a sporting goods outlet. His hands were the hands of someone who fixed things for a living, calloused and scarred in small ways that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with work. He stepped back immediately after Ryan hit the mat, hands down, no expression of triumph. He simply extended his arm and waited. Ryan took the hand and let himself be pulled to his feet. He stood there for a moment, chest heaving, looking at Daniel with something between confusion and a respect he had not expected to feel that afternoon. "What the hell was that?" Ryan said. "Judo," Daniel said. "You gave me your weight. I just borrowed it." But I am getting ahead of myself, because to understand those 3 seconds, you have to understand what came before them. You have to go back to 4:15 in the morning to a cold apartment on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, where a man was already awake before his alarm could make a sound. The heating system at Riverside Commons had been broken for 7 weeks. The landlord had used the word repair twice in official communications, which was property management language, for we are aware of the problem and have decided not to care about it unless the city forces our hand. The temperature inside apartment 14B on a November morning was cold enough that Daniel's breath appeared in small clouds when he exhaled, rising and dissolving in the darkness above the couch where he slept. He did not have a bedroom. There was one bedroom in the apartment, and it belonged to his son. This was not a subject Daniel had ever debated with himself. Caleb was 8 years old. Caleb needed stability, a door he could close, a space that was entirely his own, especially now, especially after everything that had happened. A man could sleep anywhere. A boy needed a room. This was simply true the way certain things are simply true, and Daniel had arranged his life around it without resentment or self-pity. He lay still for a moment after waking, listening through the thin wall for any sound from Caleb's room. Nothing. The boy slept deeply and completely, which Daniel had long considered one of the quiet mercies of his life. He silenced the alarm before it could complete its first sound and swung his legs off the couch. The apartment was small in the way that forces efficiency, a living room that also functioned as Daniel's bedroom, a kitchen with a table that seated 2, a bathroom where the hot water took 4 minutes to arrive. Everything was clean. Everything had a place. Daniel had learned a long time ago that order in a small space was not just aesthetic preference, but a form of sanity, a way of maintaining control over the things you could control when so much else was beyond your reach. He dressed quietly in the dark, pulling on his sweatpants and the Marine's hoodie he had owned for 12 years. He checked his phone before putting it in his pocket. No messages. He set it to the side where he could see it, not because he expected anything at this hour, but because Caleb sometimes woke in the night from dreams he did not describe in detail, only acknowledged with a soft knock on the wall, and Daniel wanted to be reachable even here, even in the parking lot 3 stories below. Outside, the November air hit him like cold water. The parking lot of Riverside Commons was lit by 3 orange sodium lamps, the kind that cast light without warmth, painting everything the color of rust. His breath came out in steady plumes as he walked to the far edge of the lot, away from the parked cars, and lowered himself to the cracked asphalt. He started with push-ups, 50 counted silently, then mountain climbers, then burpees that left his lungs burning in the cold air. This was not a gym routine designed by a trainer with a clipboard. This was a man doing what needed to be done in the only time and space available to him, which was a broken parking lot at 4 in the morning, while the city slept around him. He had been doing this for 6 months. 6 months since he had seen the recruitment announcement for the State Police Academy posted on the bulletin board in the lobby of the Grandview Properties office building where he worked as a maintenance technician. He had read it twice standing there in his work uniform with a toolbox in his hand, and then he had gone back to fixing the elevator on the 14th floor. But the announcement had stayed with him, following him through the rest of that workday and into the evening and through the night until he found himself sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, running the numbers in his head for the 4th time. The numbers were not easy. The academy stipend during training was modest. The timing would require careful management of every expense. He was 36 years old, which was not disqualifying, but was not typical either. And he had Caleb to consider in every calculation, Caleb who needed consistency, who needed his father present, who had already absorbed more disruption in his 8 years than most adults experienced in a decade. But the other numbers were also real. The ceiling at Grandview Properties was low and fixed. The salary from his maintenance work, supplemented by the overnight security shifts he picked up twice a week, added up to just enough. Just enough was not the same as enough. The health insurance through Grandview covered most of Caleb's asthma medication, but not all of it, and there were months when Daniel looked at the pharmacy receipt and did the arithmetic with a familiar tightness in his chest. He wanted more for Caleb, not more in the abstract, sentimental sense, but more in the specific, concrete sense. Better health care, a savings account with actual numbers in it, the possibility of a different apartment someday, or a small house somewhere, with a yard where a boy could leave his bicycle outside without it disappearing overnight. He had made a promise. In a hospital room 3 years ago, holding the hand of the woman who was leaving the world too early, he had promised to be enough for both of them. He intended to keep it. By 5:30, he was back inside, showered and dressed in his Grandview uniform. He started the coffee, the one small luxury he allowed himself without compromise. Everything else in his life could be store brand, stretched, or skipped. But the coffee was good because some things needed to remain intact. At 5:45, he went to Caleb's door and knocked softly. The sound that came back was not quite language, not quite acknowledgement, but something in between that Daniel had learned to interpret over 8 years as meaning, "I am technically awake and you may proceed." He opened the door. Caleb emerged from his blankets with the slow, rumpled dignity of a child who had been dreaming somewhere warm and was not entirely convinced the waking world was an improvement. His hair was the same dark brown as his mother's, and it went in several directions at once in the morning. He had a gap between his 2 front teeth that appeared when he smiled, which was often, and a way of looking at the world with a directness that occasionally caught adults off guard. His jacket pockets were always heavy with interesting rocks he had collected on previous walks, a habit that had started when he was 5 and showed no signs of ending. "Big spelling test today," Daniel said, sliding a bowl of cereal across the table. Caleb sat down and considered this information with appropriate seriousness. 20 words. "Miss Patterson says if we all get at least 15 right, we get extra recess." "Then you better get all 20. Can't let your classmates down." The gap-toothed smile came out. "I studied all of them. Want to quiz me?" They went through the words while Caleb ate. Daniel stood at the counter, not looking at the list, calling them out from memory because he had listened to Caleb practice them enough times that they had settled into him. Caleb sounded out each one with fierce, quiet concentration. Necessary, occurrence, consequence. The boy was not performing for his father. He was simply doing the work, which was something Daniel recognized and valued in a way that went beyond the spelling words themselves. This kid, this particular, specific, irreplaceable kid. At 6:45, they walked the 3 blocks to school together, Caleb clinking faintly from the rocks in his pockets like a small prospector, making his way through the world. Near the school entrance, Caleb looked up at his father. "You have that training thing today. Tryouts start this afternoon after my shift." "Is that the police thing?" "Yeah, that's the police thing." Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching a leaf skip across the sidewalk ahead of them. "Are you going to be a cop, Dad?" Daniel crouched down so they were at the same level. He looked at his son straight on the way he always did when the conversation mattered. "I'm going to try. That's all I can promise you. But trying counts for something." The hug came suddenly and fiercely the way Caleb's hugs always came with his whole body and no warning. Daniel held him for a beat longer than the occasion strictly required. Then he released him with a gentle push toward the school entrance and watched until the boy disappeared through the doors. He checked his watch. 7 minutes to get across town to Grandview. He started running. The day moved through its familiar rhythms. A broken washing machine in the building's laundry room on the second floor. A clogged drain on the ninth. A woman on the 12th floor named Mrs. Patterson, no relation to Caleb's teacher, calling for the third time this month about her garbage disposal. Daniel listened, diagnosed, repaired. His hands remembered how to do these things without requiring much conscious direction, which left his mind free to run through what was coming that afternoon. At lunch, he sat on an overturned bucket in the maintenance storage room with the sandwich he had made before dawn and the legal codes he had been reading every lunch break for 6 months. His co-worker, Marcus Webb, found him there carrying an energy drink that probably cost more than Daniel's entire meal. Marcus was 22 years old and had the uncomplicated optimism of someone who had not yet been seriously tested by anything. He was good at his job and generous with his time and genuinely kind in ways that required no effort from him because his life had not yet required him to be otherwise. Daniel liked him without resentment. "You really doing this police thing?" Marcus asked. "Tryouts start today," Daniel confirmed. "Man." Marcus leaned against the doorframe. "Those things are supposed to be brutal. My cousin tried last year, didn't make it past the first physical assessment. I'll manage." Marcus studied him with something between admiration and the particular confusion of the young when confronted with the choices of the middle-aged. "You're what, 36? Most of these guys trying out are fresh out of college." 36, Daniel confirmed. "Still got some good years left." "Why now, though? You've got a decent job here. Benefits, steady hours." Daniel took another bite of his sandwich and chewed slowly. The true answer was complicated in the way that true answers usually are. It involved a pharmacy receipt from 3 months ago that he had not thrown away because the number on it had clarified something for him. It involved lying awake doing arithmetic that never came out with enough room. It involved a promise made in a hospital room to a woman who was no longer in the world, and the weight of that promise pressing down on him every single morning when the alarm went off. He did not say any of that to Marcus. Instead, he said, "Better opportunities, better future for Caleb." Marcus nodded. He was 22 and he didn't fully understand, couldn't yet, but he was gracious enough not to pretend that he did. "Well, good luck, man. I hope you make it." "Thanks." At 3 o'clock, Daniel clocked out, changed into his workout clothes in the building bathroom, and drove his 2009 Honda Civic across Columbus toward the State Police Training Center. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. His heartbeat was not. He had been preparing for this afternoon for 6 months. 6 months of parking lot training in the dark. 6 months of legal codes at lunch. 6 months of physical conditioning that left him so exhausted some nights that he fell asleep sitting upright on the couch while helping Caleb with homework, jerking awake to find the boy watching him with patient, unsurprised eyes. The training facility was impressive in the way that institutional buildings built to project authority tend to be impressive. The parking lot told its own story. Lifted trucks, new SUVs, a dark blue Mustang that still had dealer plates. Daniel parked his Civic in the back row and walked toward the main gymnasium, following signs for Group 7 recruitment tryouts. Inside the gymnasium had been converted into an assessment facility. Stations arranged around the perimeter. In the center, sparring mats with the particular institutional cleanliness of surfaces that had absorbed a great deal of effort over time. Already perhaps 50 people were scattered across the space, stretching, talking, moving through the unconscious social choreography of strangers assessing each other. Daniel found a quiet corner and began his warm-up. Slow, deliberate. He was watching while he moved, reading the room the way he had learned to read rooms during 8 years in the Marines, cataloging information without appearing to. The demographics were clear, mostly male, mostly under 28. Mostly the kind of physical confidence that came from having spent years in a body that had always performed exactly as required. Good shoes, new gear. People who had trained for this, yes, but also people for whom this kind of training was simply the latest chapter in a long story of athletic ease. And then there was Daniel with his faded hoodie and his discount sneakers in his hands that had been fixing things since before some of these recruits were in high school, warming up in a corner as if he was trying not to take up too much space. He noticed the glances, The assessments happening in 2-second intervals across the room. The way eyes would move to him and then away, not with hostility, but with the casual dismissal reserved for things that do not require further consideration. He had heard worse. He kept warming up. Ryan Fletcher introduced himself with the open, uncalculated confidence of someone who had never had a reason to be cautious. Big handshake, good smile, genuinely friendly in the way athletes often are before competition. He had played linebacker at Ohio State, he said. His father had been Army. He was ready for this. He did 50 push-ups to demonstrate, not maliciously, just naturally, the way large, capable people sometimes fill space with capability without fully registering the effect. Then he popped back to his feet without breathing hard and grinned. Daniel said his name and shook the hand and matched the grip without competing with it. He noted the absence of calluses on Ryan's palms, the hands of someone who had trained hard but not for a living. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doors opened and Sergeant Patricia Greer walked in with 2 other officers. The room quieted in the immediate, instinctive way that certain presences command silence without requesting it. Greer was in her mid-40s, compact and composed, with the bearing of a person who had accumulated enough experience that nothing surprised her and very little concerned her. Her eyes moved across the assembled recruits with a steady, evaluating quality that made it clear she was already working. She did not raise her voice to speak. She did not need to. "I'm Sergeant Greer," she said. "Over the next 3 days, we will be evaluating your fitness for state police training. Some of you will advance. Most of you will not. This is not personal. This job is simply not for everyone, and the kindest thing we can do is find that out here rather than later." She paused to let that settle. "We are looking for physical capability, yes, but we are also looking for judgment, composure, integrity. The ability to function as part of a team when functioning is the last thing your body wants to do." Another pause. "The strongest person in this room is not automatically the best candidate. Keep that in mind." Something in Daniel's chest eased by a degree he had not expected. The next 2 hours moved in a controlled blur. Bench press, sprints, vertical jumps, agility drills. Daniel moved through each station with quiet efficiency, posting numbers that were respectable without being exceptional. He watched Ryan attack each station as if personal records were the point, maxing out on bench press until his arms shook, sprinting at full effort until he had to bend double and gasp between runs. Impressive and unsustainable. The kind of performance that looked magnificent at the beginning of a 3-day assessment and became a liability by day 2. Daniel conserved. He knew there were 36 more hours of this. Peak performance in hour 1 was a way of borrowing against hours he would need later. During a water break, he stood near the wall and overheard 2 recruits talking nearby. One of them said something about the older guy, the skinny one, and the other laughed. He drank his water with his face neutral and his mind quiet. These were kids talking. It touched nothing that mattered. At 6 o'clock, Greer called everyone to the center mats. "Sparring assessment," she said. 3-minute rounds. Light to moderate contact. I want to see technique, control, and composure. This is not a fight. This is a demonstration that you can handle physical confrontation without losing your judgment. She began calling pairs. Fletcher and Shaw. Ryan looked over at Daniel and grinned with the easy warmth of someone who had already calculated the outcome. "Here we go, old-timer. I'll take it easy on you." The room shifted. People moved to get better sight lines. There was a particular quality to their attention, an anticipatory enjoyment that had nothing to do with genuine assessment and everything to do with watching something they had already decided was inevitable. Daniel stepped onto the mat. He fitted his headgear carefully, taking his time, not rushing. He had learned a long time ago that the seconds before a confrontation were actually the most valuable seconds available to him. Time to observe, time to think, time to choose. Ryan bounced on his toes, shadow punching, to warm up, performing for the room in the way that young athletes sometimes do when they are not yet aware they are performing. Greer raised her hand. "Begin." Ryan came forward immediately. High guard, good footwork, the fundamentals of someone who had learned from quality instruction. He threw a jab to measure distance, then a cross with genuine power behind it. Daniel slipped it. Not a block, not a deflection, just a 2-inch movement of his head to the right, and the fist went past his ear with a sound like something cutting air. Ryan reset. His expression shifted fractionally, not to concern, but to recalibration. He threw a combination jab cross hook fast and committed. Daniel backed up and read it. Not the punches, the man throwing them. The way Ryan's weight loaded into each strike as if energy was unlimited. The slight forward lean at the end of every combination, the unconscious telegraph of someone accustomed to his power being enough. A leg kick came at Daniel's thigh. He checked it shin to shin, absorbing the impact without expression. It hurt. He filed that information away without acting on it. Ryan pressed forward. He was reading Daniel's retreat as fear, which was a natural and understandable interpretation if you were 25 and had never been fooled by patience before. He threw a hard straight punch aimed at Daniel's chest, full commitment, the weight of his whole body going forward behind it. That was the moment Daniel had been constructing for 60 seconds. The punch was fully extended. Ryan's balance was forward and committed. There was a single physical instant when a large, strong, fast young man had given away his center of gravity to the wrong person. Daniel moved left. His left hand redirected Ryan's extended arm, not with force, but with precision, changing the direction of something already in motion. He pivoted, and Ryan's own momentum carried him past. Daniel's right hand found the back of Ryan's neck, controlling posture. One sweep of the front leg, using what Ryan had given him. Ryan went down hard, the air leaving his lungs in an audible rush, his back flat against the mat. 3 seconds. The gymnasium went silent. Daniel stepped back immediately. Hands down. He extended his arm and waited. Ryan took the hand, got to his feet, stood there for a moment looking at Daniel with an expression that was working through several things simultaneously. "What the hell was that?" Ryan said. "Judo," Daniel said. "You gave me your weight. I just borrowed it." The remaining 2.5 minutes were different. Ryan approached with genuine attention, now the specific quality of focus that replaces assumption when assumption has been suddenly invalidated. He was still stronger, still faster in many ways. But he was no longer certain, and certainty had been his primary weapon. When Greer called time, both men touched gloves. Ryan looked at Daniel for a moment, then walked back toward his bench without speaking, moving differently than he had moved before. The easy possession of the room was gone. Something quieter and more considered had replaced it. That shift Daniel understood was more significant than the takedown itself. As the recruits filtered out at 8 o'clock, Daniel grabbed his bag and moved toward the exit. He was thinking about getting home, about Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, who had Caleb, about a boy waiting with questions. "Shaw," he turned. Sergeant Greer was walking toward him with the measured pace of someone who had decided to say something and was going to say it efficiently. She looked at him for a moment before speaking. "That was good work today," she said. "Controlled. Professional. Thank you, ma'am." "How old are you?" 36. "The average age of our recruits is 24. "I'm aware I'm not a typical candidate." Greer studied him with those sharp, settled eyes. "Why now? Why this?" He had a diplomatic answer ready. He set it aside. "I have a son," he said, 8 years old. His mother passed 3 years ago. I do maintenance and security work, and I'm good at both, but the ceiling is low. I need something with better prospects. Something I can build into a career that gives him stability, gives him real options." Greer was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant amount of pressure to put on yourself." "It's the pressure I've got," Daniel said. "So I work with it." A silence. Then Greer nodded once. 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, Shaw. Don't be late." She walked away without adding anything to that. He stood there for a moment in the emptying gymnasium. The mats where he had borrowed Ryan Fletcher's weight were already being rolled back against the wall. He drove home through Columbus at night through the orange-lit streets he knew by the quality of their pavement and the timing of their traffic lights. He was 40 minutes late, which Mrs. Dorothy Hayes absorbed with the practiced grace of a woman who had been navigating other people's difficult circumstances for 70 years. She refused the money he tried to press into her hand, told him Caleb had eaten well and done his reading, and mentioned that the boy's winter coat was getting thin across the shoulders. He filed that away. One more thing on the list. One more reason. Caleb was wound up with questions moving around the apartment in his pajamas and asking about fighting and winning and whether Daniel was going to be a real police officer now. Daniel answered each question while doing the ordinary things, getting the boy into bed, the routine that was its own form of stability. "You'll make it," Caleb said from his pillow, with the total confidence of someone who had access to information Daniel himself did not possess. "I'm going to try my hardest," Daniel said. "That's all I can promise." "That's enough," Caleb said. He was asleep in 4 minutes. Daniel sat on his couch in the dark. Every muscle in his body was conducting a precise inventory of the day's demands. His shin throbbed where he had checked Ryan's kick. His shoulders ached from the bench press. The particular exhaustion of 36, which was not the same as 25, and did not pretend to be, sat on him like a second gravity. He thought about quitting. He was honest enough to admit that. The thought came and he looked at it clearly, and then he thought about the promise he had made, and about Caleb's face in the morning, and the thought of quitting became something he could not locate in himself anymore. He set his alarm for 4:15 and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would be there at 6 o'clock sharp. He always showed up. The second day of tryouts began before the sun had any serious intention of rising. Daniel was in the parking lot of the training facility at 5:48, sitting in his Civic with the engine off, watching the building's exterior lights cast long, pale rectangles across the wet pavement. It had rained overnight, the kind of quiet November rain that left everything looking cleaned and cold. He had slept 4 hours. His shins still ached from the checked kick. His shoulders had the deep structural soreness of muscles that had been genuinely tested rather than merely exercised. He did a slow inventory of his body the way he had learned to do in the Marines, cataloging damage, without dramatizing it, separating what needed attention from what could be managed and set aside. The shin could be managed. The shoulders could be managed. The 40 minutes of sleep he had lost, running numbers in his head at 2 in the morning, could not be recovered, so he set that aside too. He was in the gymnasium at 5:58. Sergeant Greer noted it without comment, but she noted it. The second day moved through scenario training with a different quality than the physical assessments of the day before. Greer had set up stations throughout the facility, each one presenting a situation with no clean resolution, only degrees of appropriate response. Domestic disturbance simulations. Traffic stop scenarios that escalated in unpredictable directions. Active situation assessments where the right answer was not always the obvious one. Daniel was paired with a woman named Anna Cole, 28 years old, who moved with the controlled, compressed efficiency of someone who had trained in martial arts seriously and for a long time. She was quick where Daniel was measured, instinctive where he was deliberate, and within the first 20 minutes of working together, they had found a rhythm that neither of them had to discuss. "You're good at talking people down," Anna observed during a break between stations. "I managed an apartment building for 4.5 years, Daniel said. Every resident was one broken pipe away from a genuine crisis." She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that meant something had actually landed. "Fair point." Ryan Fletcher found Daniel at lunch carrying his tray with the slightly subdued energy of someone who had spent the previous night processing something unexpected. He sat down without asking, which Daniel took as a sign of genuine comfort rather than presumption. There was none of the competitive posturing of the day before. Only a young man who had been surprised and was being honest about it. "Listen," Ryan said, "about yesterday, I assumed you'd be easy because you're older. That was a bad assumption and I want to own that." "Experience counts for something," Daniel said simply. "Yeah." Ryan looked at his food for a moment. "I'm seeing that now." He ate in silence for a moment, then looked up. "Where did you actually learn to fight like that?" "Marines gave me the foundation. Military police force protection, 8 years of situations where the outcome was real. After I got out, I kept training because it was one of the few things I could do cheaply. Judo club at the community center, some boxing at a recreation league, whatever I could find that cost $20 a month or less." Ryan absorbed this. "Why'd you leave the Marines?" "Got married. My wife wanted me stateside. I was young enough to think that staying home and fixing things would be enough. Then she got sick." He paused. "Then she was gone. And here I am putting the pieces back together in whatever order makes sense." Ryan was quiet for long enough that the silence had weight. "How old is your kid?" "8. His name is Caleb." "Must be hard, doing all of this with someone depending on you." "It's why I'm doing it," Daniel said simply. They sat without talking for a moment, which was its own kind of conversation. Then Ryan said something that surprised Daniel by its directness. I hope you make it. This place needs more people who've actually lived a life, not just guys like me who think being physically strong is the whole answer. Being strong helps, Daniel said. Yeah, but it's not everything. By the end of the second day, Daniel had posted consistent scores across every assessment category. Not the highest numbers in the room, but steady and steadiness across 3 days of accumulating pressure told a different story than peak performance in isolated moments. Greer watched him through the afternoon with the evaluating attention of someone building a case for a conclusion she had not yet announced. At 8 o'clock, she dismissed them. Daniel was almost to the door when she called his name. Good scenario work today, she said. You read situations before they escalate. That's instinct shaped by experience. It's both, Daniel said. She almost smiled. 6 o'clock tomorrow. Last day. He drove home and collected Caleb from Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, who fed him soup without being asked, and told him he looked like he needed it, which was accurate. He tucked Caleb in and answered questions about police work until the boy's eyes grew heavy, and his questions began to lose their endings, trailing off into sleep mid-sentence. Day 3 was different from the moment it started. The parking lot held fewer cars. The gymnasium had the specific atmosphere of a space where attrition had done its work. Those who remained had something in their faces that had not been there on the first morning, the stripped-down quality, the particular expression of people who had been tested enough to stop performing and start simply being. Greer addressed them with the economy of someone who understood that the time for motivational framing had passed. Final day. You have made it this far, which means you are all capable of something. But capability is the floor, not the ceiling. Today we test your limits, and then we see what you do when your limits have been reached. The first event was a team obstacle course with weighted packs and a collective timing standard. Everyone finishes or no one finishes. Daniel was grouped with Ryan and Nicole and 2 others. They moved through mud crawls and rope climbs and wall obstacles with the grim focused efficiency of people who had no energy left for anything other than the task directly in front of them. 2 hours in, a recruit named Marcus Tanner twisted his ankle on a rope swing and went down hard. I'm done, Tanner said through his teeth. Go ahead. Don't let me kill your time. Ryan looked at the course ahead and then back at Tanner and then at Daniel with the expression of someone doing a calculation they already knew the answer to, but were hoping someone would correct. Daniel crouched next to Tanner. Can you put weight on it? Maybe it hurts bad. We're not leaving you, Daniel said. He looked up at Ryan and Anna. We carry him. We finish together. Ryan hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he nodded. Together. Anna was already moving to Tanner's other side before Ryan finished the word. They fashioned a carry using 2 jackets, distributing Tanner's weight between them, moving slower but moving. Other teams passed them. One team finished while Daniel's group was still on the 3rd obstacle from the end. None of that mattered. When they crossed the finish line, all 5 of them were across it. Greer was waiting at the end. She looked at Tanner's ankle, already swelling. She looked at Daniel. She did not say anything, but the look carried information. The final assessment was individual, scenario-based. Daniel's assigned situation involved a juvenile shoplifting case that was straightforward on its surface and complicated beneath it. The juvenile was played by a young officer who committed fully to the role hostile and defensive. Daniel approached. The juvenile immediately escalated, voice uprights invoked. Daniel stopped walking. He looked at the young officer for a moment. Then he sat down on the floor cross-legged, reducing his own physical presence to something unthreatening, and waited. The juvenile did not know what to do with that. The hostility flickered. I'm not here to arrest you, Daniel said quietly. I'm here to understand what happened. Can we talk about that? Why would I talk to you? Because the alternative is, this gets formal, and formal is harder to walk back from. I'd rather find a way through this that doesn't follow you for the next 10 years. A silence. Then I just wanted to get my mom something. For her birthday. I don't have any money, and I just wanted to get her something nice. So you took something. A nod. Okay, Daniel said. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to return it. You're going to apologize to the owner, and then we're going to see if there's a way for you to work off what you tried to take instead of turning this into charges. Does that sound fair? The young officer broke character to extend his hand. Most people go straight to intimidation, he said. That was something different. Greer called the assessment from the doorway. Shaw, you solved the problem you were actually given, not the one that was easier to respond to. The recruits waited for an hour and a half after the final scenarios. The waiting was its own test. Daniel sat with his hands on his knees and thought about Caleb, which was what he always did when he needed to find stillness. Greer emerged with a list. She read names steadily without theatrical pauses, without inflection, that would telegraph outcomes before they arrived. Each person called walked forward, received an envelope, opened it. Ryan Fletcher. Ryan walked up, accepted his envelope, opened it. His grin arrived and stayed. Anna Cole. The small, controlled smile of someone who had expected this but was still genuinely relieved. More names, more envelopes. Daniel Shaw. He walked to the front on legs that felt like they belonged to someone who had been awake for too long, carrying too much weight. Greer handed him the envelope with the neutral expression she had maintained throughout 3 days. He took it. He did not open it there. He went to his car. He sat in the driver's seat with the envelope in both hands and looked at it for a moment. The parking lot was emptying around him. He opened it. He read the first line. Then he read it again. Then he set the letter on the passenger seat and looked out through the windshield at nothing in particular and breathed slowly and deliberately for about 30 seconds. Congratulations. You have been selected for State Police Academy training. He started the car. Caleb was at Mrs. Dorothy's working on a Lego construction spread across the living room floor. He looked up when Daniel came through the door and read his father's face with the accuracy of a child who had been learning that particular text for 8 years. Daniel crouched down. I made it, he said. I'm in. The Lego construction was forgotten immediately. Caleb launched himself forward with no warning and no calculation, just the full weight of an 8-year-old's joy, and Daniel caught him and held him, and felt something that had been wound very tight in his chest begin slowly to release. Mrs. Dorothy appeared in the kitchen doorway, took in the scene and smiled with the unhurried warmth of someone who had been hoping for exactly this. She declined the $20 Daniel tried to give her. She mentioned again that Caleb's winter coat was getting thin. He would get the coat. He would get it soon. That night, after Caleb was asleep, Daniel sat on his couch with the acceptance letter on the coffee table in front of him. He thought about the road ahead. 24 weeks of the hardest thing he had done since the Marines. 24 weeks of being tested in every dimension simultaneously, and every single morning the alarm would go off and he would have to choose again to get up and continue. Not once, but daily, which was the only way anything difficult was ever actually accomplished. He thought about the promise made in the hospital room, about what it meant to keep a promise not in a single moment, but across 1,000 ordinary mornings that followed it. He set the letter down. He set his alarm. He closed his eyes. The academy was an hour outside Columbus, a campus of classroom buildings and dormitories and training facilities set against the flat Ohio landscape. Daniel arrived at 5:45 for a 6 o'clock start on the first official day. He recognized several faces from the tryouts. Ryan Fletcher's truck was near the entrance. Anna Cole was walking toward the main building with the stride of someone who knew where she was going. Inside, 60 recruits were organized into 3 companies. Daniel found his name under Company B. His dormitory room held 3 others. Kara Briggs, 31 Army reservist with 6 years of service, efficient and no nonsense, and fiercely loyal to anyone who earned her respect. James Park, 27, methodical and quiet, and extraordinarily capable with legal concepts. Travis Ford, 24, a former college linebacker whose primary gift to the room's atmosphere was an inexhaustible supply of decent humor deployed at moments when humor was exactly what was needed. Kara Briggs looked at Daniel when they were setting up the room and said without preamble, "You're the one who put Ryan Fletcher on the floor." "He gave me his weight," Daniel said. Kara studied him with the evaluating attention of someone assessing a potential asset. "Army Reserve 6 years, you Marines. Out 12 years ago. What did you do in between? Maintenance work, security, had a wife, lost her." He kept his voice level. "It's just me and my son now." Something shifted in Kara's expression, not softening exactly, more like recognition. The particular recognition of someone who understood the weight of a statement like that without needing it explained. James Park, organizing his side of the room with precise, systematic attention, said without looking up, "My father raised 3 children alone after my mother left. It is not easy, but it makes you understand what actually matters." Nobody responded immediately, but something settled into the room that would remain there for the next 24 weeks. Sergeant Greer's address to Company B on the first morning established the framework for everything that followed. They would succeed collectively or fail collectively. There was no individual achievement in this program, only collective excellence or collective failure. Fall below academic standards, and they were out. Fail physical requirements, and they were out. Demonstrate poor judgment in scenarios, and they were out. This is not negotiable, Greer said. You are preparing for a career where your mistakes carry consequences that extend far beyond yourselves. We take that seriously. You should too. Then she read through the curriculum schedule. Physical training, criminal law, constitutional procedure, scenario work, firearms qualification. She read the firearms item the same way she read everything else with neutral efficiency. Week 12, firearms qualification, minimum score 210 out of 300. 2 failed attempts results in dismissal. Daniel wrote it down in his notebook. He lay awake that night doing an honest assessment of his situation. He had not fired a service pistol in 12 years. His military qualification had been adequate rather than excellent. 12 years was a long time. He wrote 2 words at the bottom of the page, firearms. Priority. Then he turned off his flashlight and made himself sleep. The first week was the shock of adjustment, pure and relentless. Wake at 5. Physical training until the body registered genuine objection. 4 hours of classroom instruction. Afternoon scenarios, evening study. 10 o'clock lights out, repeat. Daniel averaged 5 hours of sleep. He studied after lights out with a small flashlight. He called Caleb every evening before 9, and those calls were simultaneously the best and the most difficult part of each day, the sound of the boy's voice anchoring him to everything that mattered, while also making the distance feel exactly as large as it was. How's the academy? Caleb asked one evening about 10 days in. Challenging, Daniel said. I'm learning a lot. Are you the best in your class? I'm holding my own. That's what matters right now. After they hung up, Kara looked over from her desk. Your kid, she said. Yeah, he's lucky to have you. I'm not sure he'd agree some mornings. When you're present, you're actually present, Kara said. That matters more than hours logged. James Park's voice came from behind his textbook. My father worked long hours for years. I resented him as a child. Now I understand what he was building. Your son will understand too. Travis Ford threw a tennis ball at the ceiling, caught it, and said, Meanwhile, I'm over here with nobody depending on me, and I'm still terrified. You people aren't on a different level. Daniel smiled at the ceiling. You just haven't found your reason yet, Travis. Week 3 brought the first major academic assessment, criminal law. Daniel worked methodically through every section, drawing on 6 months of lunch break reading and late nights with his flashlight. He scored 89%. Ryan Fletcher, who had come to Daniel's room the night before and spent 2 hours working through probable cause standards with focused desperation, scored 77. Failed. He would need a retake. 3 members of Company B did not pass and were not given retake opportunities. Their beds were empty by dinner. Travis Ford stared at one of the empty beds for a long time that evening without saying anything funny. The days accumulated. Weeks moved the way weeks move inside an institution with a defined rhythm, both quickly and with great subjective weight. Daniel found his footing. Academically, he was consistently in the upper quarter. Physically, he performed above minimum standards without threatening the top positions held by people a decade younger. In scenario training, he was developing a reputation among the instructors for a specific quality that was harder to quantify than sprint times, but that Greer had noticed. He read situations. He read people. He found the real problem underneath the presenting problem and addressed that. These were not skills the academy had given him. These were skills his life had given him. The academy was simply the context in which they became visible. Week 14 brought Operation Crossfire. 48 hours, live simulation. Recruits divided into patrol shifts, 12-hour rotations, responding to dispatch calls exactly as they would in actual field conditions. Daniel was assigned to Charlie shift with Ryan Fletcher as his partner. The first 12 hours were relentless. Car prowling, suspect foot pursuit, arrest. Domestic disturbance requiring careful de-escalation. A traffic accident with injuries. A false alarm that still required a full building search. They moved through each call with the functional communication of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Ryan handling physical confrontations with assured capability, Daniel managing communication, de-escalation, documentation. By 6 in the morning after 19 consecutive hours, Ryan's decisions were taking a beat longer than they should have. Not dangerously slow, but measurably slower. Daniel noted it without comment. At 7:23, dispatch sent them to a mental health crisis call. The subject was on a third-floor balcony. A small cluster of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk below. Ryan got out of the patrol car and moved toward the building entrance with the decisive energy of someone running on adrenaline and not much else. "Police," he said loudly as they entered. "Come inside. Now." From somewhere above them came the sound of movement, a body shifting against a railing. Daniel put a hand on Ryan's arm. Quietly. "I've got this. Get the crowd back. Establish a perimeter." Ryan looked at him. He was tired enough that the automatic resistance was slow to arrive, and by the time it would have arrived, Daniel had already moved toward the stairs. The apartment door was open. The crying was coming from the balcony, a sound that had been going on for long enough that the person making it had run out of the kind of crying that expected a response and settled into the kind that expected nothing. Daniel did not approach the balcony. He did not stand in the doorway. He sat down on the floor of the living room, cross-legged with his back against the couch, reducing himself to the least threatening physical configuration available to him. Then he waited. After a moment, he said, "My name is Daniel. I'm not going to tell you to come inside. I'm just going to sit here for a while if that's okay." Nothing from the balcony. "Then why?" "Because you've been out there for a while and I thought you might want someone nearby who isn't going to make demands." A long silence. The sound of the city coming slowly awake several floors below. "You don't know anything about me." "You're right," Daniel said. "I don't." He paused. "I know what it feels like to be awake at 3 in the morning and not be able to find a reason for the next day. I know what that weight feels like. I'm not going to tell you I understand your specific situation because I don't. But that particular weight, I know it." From the balcony, after a silence that had its own texture, "Did you ever think about not continuing?" "Yes," Daniel said. He did not dress it up. "After my wife died, my son was 5. There were nights when the only thing that got me to the next morning was knowing he would call for me at 6 o'clock, and I could not leave that unanswered." Another silence. Longer this time. "What do you want from me?" the voice said. "Nothing you're not willing to give. But I'd like you to come inside. Not because of what happens if you don't, because there are people and options on this side of the railing that don't exist on the other side, and some of those options might be worth knowing about." The sound of hands releasing their grip on something. The sound of feet on concrete moving inward. Daniel did not stand up. He stayed where he was on the floor, giving the space to the person who needed it. She came through the doorway slowly, a young woman in her early 20s, with the hollowed look of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. She looked at Daniel sitting on the floor, and something in her expression shifted from whatever it had been before to something more uncertain, less defended. "Why are you sitting on the floor?" she said. "Seemed less threatening than standing," Daniel said. "Also, my feet hurt. It's been a long shift." It was not a joke designed to diffuse tension. It was simply true, and sometimes the truth stated plainly does something that no technique can accomplish. She sat down against the opposite wall. Daniel radioed for an ambulance and a mental health crisis team. He stayed on the floor until they arrived. Afterward, in the parking lot, Ryan stood next to the patrol car and looked at Daniel with the expression of someone revising a substantial number of prior assessments simultaneously. "You stayed on the floor the whole time," Ryan said. "Standing over someone in crisis feels like dominance," Daniel said. "Same level feels like conversation." Ryan shook his head slowly. "I couldn't have done that. I don't have anything to say to someone in that situation." Daniel looked at him. "You will someday. That's not a criticism. It's just true." The Operation Crossfire scores were posted 2 days later. Daniel's overall evaluation was 91 out of 100, third in Company B. Top 15% across all 3 companies. The mental health crisis intervention had been noted specifically exceptional rapport-building de-escalation through genuine human connection, rather than technique, exactly the approach we want officers to take. He read the feedback sitting at his dormitory desk, while James Park read case law across the room, and Travis Ford threw his tennis ball at the ceiling with the rhythmic patience of a man waiting for something to resolve. Third in the company, top 15% overall. He thought about the parking lot at 4 in the morning, about 6 months of lunch breaks, about a promise. He opened his phone and started typing a text to Caleb. Then he stopped. It was late. The boy was asleep. He would tell him in the morning. He always told him in the morning. Week 12 arrived with a particular weight. Daniel stood at the firearms range on a Tuesday morning and looked at his qualification score. 198 out of 300. The minimum passing score was 210. He had failed. He stood there with the scorecard in his hand and did not move for a moment. Around him, other recruits processed their own results. Nobody said anything to Daniel. The failure of someone else tends to produce a studied avoidance of eye contact and a sudden, intense interest in other things. He was aware of all of this. He set it aside. He had known this was coming since week 1, when Greer had read out the qualification requirements and Daniel had written 2 words in his notebook and then lain awake running an honest assessment of his situation. He had not fired a service pistol in 12 years. His military qualification had been adequate rather than excellent. 12 years of maintenance work had given his hands skills that had nothing to do with trigger control. He had 1 week to improve by 12 points or he would be dismissed. That evening he called Caleb at 8:30. He kept his voice level and warm and told the boy about his day in the way he always did, selecting the parts that were appropriate for an 8-year-old. The boy talked about his school project on the solar system. He had been assigned Mars. "Because of your hair," Daniel said. "That's what Miss Patterson said. She said Mars is reddish-brown like my hair when the sun hits it. She's right, Mars is a good planet, strong, keeps going even when it's far from the sun." "Is that about me or about you?" Daniel paused. The boy was 8 years old. "Maybe both," he said. After they hung up, he sat on his bunk in the dark dormitory. Kara Briggs was sitting on her bunk cleaning her duty boots. She had not asked him about his score. She already knew. 4:30 tomorrow morning, Kara said without looking up from her boots. "Range. I qualified expert in the Army. I'm going to help you." Daniel looked at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." She set down one boot and picked up the other. "In the domestic violence scenario in week 6, you covered me correctly and made the decision that kept both of us safe. My shoulder was already compromised from week 4 defensive tactics. A different partner makes a different call that day, and I'm getting medically cleared and sent home." She looked at him directly. "You didn't do that because you were required to. You did it because it was right. This is what good officers do. They help each other." James Park turned a page in his textbook without looking up. "She is correct," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. 4:30 was he said. The next 7 mornings before dawn belonged to Kara Briggs and what she chose to teach, and Daniel Shaw, and what he was willing to learn. She did not begin with shooting. She began with observation standing behind him on the first morning as he dry-fired an unloaded weapon at a target, watching every element of his mechanics with the precise diagnostic attention of someone trained to identify failure points in complex systems. "You're anticipating," she said after the 3rd repetition. "I know. Your brain has decided when the shot is going to fire before your trigger press reaches the break point. So your muscles are already reacting to a recoil that hasn't happened yet. Your muzzle drops left before the shot breaks." She moved to stand beside him. "The shot should surprise you every time. That's not a metaphor. It's literally how the mechanics work. How do you train that out? Repetition until the conscious part of your brain stops being involved." She demonstrated her grip. Her stance is the specific relationship between her trigger finger and the guard. 1,000 dry-fire repetitions. No ammunition, just the press. Until your hands remember what to do without your head interfering. They started that morning, standing in the cold darkness of the range facility before any other recruit had arrived. Daniel pressed an empty trigger 100 times while Kara watched and corrected and watched again. On the 3rd morning, she introduced the coin drill. A small coin balanced on the front sight of the unloaded weapon. Press the trigger without the coin falling. If it falls, you are anticipating. If it stays, you are not. Daniel dropped the coin 40 times in the first session. On the 5th morning, Ryan Fletcher appeared at the range at 4:28, carrying a coffee he had made in the dormitory common room. I don't need range practice, he said preemptively, but I figured I'd come anyway. Kara looked at him. Why? Ryan shrugged with the slightly awkward honesty of someone making an admission they had not fully rehearsed. Because you're both out here at 4:30 in the morning in the cold, and I was lying in a warm bunk feeling like a bad person. Kara studied him for a moment with the evaluating expression she reserved for people she was deciding whether to respect. Then she nodded once. Don't interfere with the drills, she said. But you can be here. Ryan stayed for every remaining morning session. By the sixth day, Daniel could feel the difference in his hands. Something that had been effortful was becoming absorbed, settling into the body below the level of conscious control. The coin stayed on the front sight for longer intervals. His groups on the paper target were tightening, clustering towards center. The night before the retake, Caleb called at his usual time. Are you nervous about something? Caleb said. I have an important assessment tomorrow, Daniel said. Like a test. Like a test. A pause. Then Miss Patterson says being brave doesn't mean not being scared. Being brave means doing the hard thing even when you are scared. When did she say that? When we were nervous about our oral presentation. But I think it works for other things too. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I think you're right. Are you scared, Dad? He considered the diplomatic answer. He set it aside. A little, he said, but not enough to stop. Good, Caleb said with a simplicity that settled something in Daniel's chest. Because you never stop. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. Daniel stood on the firing line at 7 o'clock with Sergeant Greer as range officer. The Glock 17 in his hands felt different than it had 7 days ago. Not lighter, not transformed by anything dramatic. Just familiar in the way that a tool becomes familiar when you have spent enough honest hours with it. He did not think about the score. He breathed out, found his sight picture. Let his finger take up the slack in the trigger, the way Kara had shown him slowly without rushing the brake, without predicting it. The pistol fired. Then again, then again. He worked through the course of fire without rushing any of it. 7 yards standing, 15 yards kneeling, 25 yards prone, barricade positions, weak hand shooting, 90 rounds. Each one counted. When the last shot was fired, he lowered the weapon and breathed deliberately and waited for his hands to stop shaking. Greer walked down range to score the target. He watched her move clipboard against her chest pen moving. Her face gave nothing. She walked back. Shaw, final score, 224 out of 300. The number worked its way through the accumulated fatigue of 7 days of 4:30 mornings. 224, 14 points above minimum. Passing, definitively, irrevocably passing. Well done, Greer said. What Briggs did for you this week, remember it. That is what this profession looks like when it functions correctly. People who carry each other when carrying is what the situation requires. He found Kara at the equipment table. He stood in front of her. Thank you, he said. Coffee, she said. When we graduate, that's it. Just coffee. You did the work, Shaw. I just pointed at the problem. He drove home that afternoon to spend the weekend with Caleb. The boy was waiting at Mrs. Dorothy's window when Daniel pulled into the street and he came through the front door to full run. Did you pass? I passed. They spent the weekend doing the ordinary things that had become extraordinary by contrast with everything surrounding them. Grocery shopping, laundry, the park on Sunday afternoon, finding no frogs in the creek but enjoying the looking. Sunday evening, tucking Caleb in, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed in the lamplight. Only 8 more weeks, Caleb said. 8 more weeks. Then everything gets better. Daniel had learned over the years to be precise with Caleb rather than comforting in ways that would eventually require correction. Then we're in a better position, he said. There will still be challenges, but different ones. Better opportunities. Caleb processed this. Okay, he said. That's good enough. He settled into his pillow. Dad. Yeah. I'm proud of you for not quitting when it was hard. Daniel looked at his son for a moment. The lamp made a warm circle around them both. You're the reason it wasn't an option, he said. The final 8 weeks of the academy moved with the compressed cumulative intensity of an ending that had been earning itself for a long time. Daniel moved through it with the steady, unglamorous consistency that had defined his performance from the beginning. Not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most naturally gifted in any single category, but reliable across all of them every day in the way that a well-built structure is reliable not because nothing ever stresses it, but because it was designed to handle stress and has been doing so long enough to have proven it. In week 20, the mock oral board examinations were conducted by Greer and two senior officers. Daniel sat across from them in a small room and answered their questions with the directness of someone who had decided somewhere in the previous months that performing was not worth the energy it cost. Greer asked the question he had been expecting. The trap question designed to measure whether a candidate would subordinate integrity to self-preservation. His training officer orders an illegal search. What does he do? I decline, Daniel said. I document it. If the department wants officers who will violate constitutional rights to protect their own career trajectory, then this is not the right department, and now is the better time to find that out rather than 2 years from now when someone pays the real cost for that choice. Even if it ends your time here, especially then. Greer looked at him for a moment with the expression she sometimes produced when she encountered something she had been hoping to encounter. Most recruits perform for this room, she said afterward. They give us the answer they calculated we wanted. You gave us your actual values. That's rare. I'm 36, Daniel said. I used up my performance budget a long time ago. She did something then that he had not seen her do before. She smiled. It was small and brief and entirely genuine. Hold on to that, she said. This job will test it constantly. The final examinations arrived with the finality of things that have been approaching for a long time. Written exam on Monday, 5 hours. Physical assessment on Tuesday. Practical examinations on Wednesday and Thursday. Intensive scenario evaluations that required the simultaneous application of legal knowledge, tactical awareness, interpersonal judgment, and the ability to make reasonable decisions under conditions designed to make reasonable decisions difficult. Daniel worked through each component with the focused economy of someone who has no energy to waste. He finished the written exam with time remaining. He completed the physical assessment comfortably above minimum standards in every category. He moved through the practical scenarios with the calm, deliberate quality that had come to define him in the eyes of the instructors. On Friday morning at 6 o'clock, he sat at the dormitory table with his laptop open and his coffee going cold beside him and watched the academy portal load. The results appeared. Written examination 94 out of 100. Pass. Physical assessment, all requirements met. Pass. Practical examination 96 out of 100. Pass. Overall academy performance 92 out of 100. Final ranking second in Company B. Top 10% overall across all 3 companies. Status cleared for graduation. He read the status line 3 times. Then he set the laptop aside and looked out the dormitory window at the Ohio morning, coming gray and cold over the training fields, and he breathed for a while slowly and deliberately the way a man breathes when something that has been very tight for a very long time begins to release. Kara was standing in the doorway. She crossed the room, sat down across from him, and said nothing for a moment. Then second in the company. Rodriguez earned first, Daniel said. She's been working toward this her whole career. She deserved it. Your top 10% overall, Kara said, across 60 people, most of them a decade younger. Daniel looked at his coffee. We're getting that coffee now, he said, after graduation. Kara smiled. It was a real one, the kind she produced rarely enough that it carried weight when it arrived. Yeah, she said, we are. Graduation day came with unseasonable warmth for late February in Columbus, a quality of winter sunlight that felt like a concession from the season. The Academy auditorium filled with families and the specific nervous, proud energy that gathers in rooms where people are about to receive recognition they have genuinely earned. Daniel stood in formation with Company B in full-dress uniform, Kara on his left, Travis on his right, James directly behind him. 38 of the 42 recruits who had begun Company B were standing in this formation. 4 were not. Their absence was part of the story too. In the front row, Caleb Shaw sat in his Sunday clothes already rumpled. From the 40 minutes he had spent being unable to sit still, looking at the stage with the concentrated attention of someone trying to see something before it happens. Beside him, Mrs. Dorothy Hayes sat in her best blue coat, which she had owned for his 20 years and wore only when something genuinely mattered. The Academy director called names in alphabetical order. Each name produced a specific response from somewhere in the audience, the particular sound of people who had been waiting a long time to hear a specific name said in a specific context. Daniel Shaw. He walked across the stage with measured steps. He was aware of everything with the heightened clarity of significant moments. The director's firm handshake. The certificate and badge exchanged with the gravity they deserved. The director said, "Congratulations, Officer Shaw, you earned this." He turned from the stage. He found Caleb's face before he found anything else. The boy was grinning with the total uncalculated joy of someone who has been waiting for something and has finally seen it arrive. The gap-toothed smiled at full extension, eyes that were his mother's eyes, the same shape and the same light in them. He raised one hand in a small wave that was not quite a wave, more like a signal between two people who had agreed on something a long time ago and were now confirming that the agreement had been honored. Daniel returned to formation. He did not grin back in that moment. He was a professional in a formal ceremony, and he maintained his composure. But he carried that image with him off the stage and through the rest of the ceremony like something he intended to keep. Afterward, Caleb came through the crowd at a full run and hit Daniel at full speed with no consideration whatsoever for the dress uniform. Daniel caught him and held him and felt the boy's arms locked around his neck with the fierce unconditional grip of someone who had been patient long enough. "You did it," Caleb said into his shoulder. "We did it," Daniel said. He pulled back far enough to look at his son directly. "I could not have done any part of this without you understanding why it mattered, without you being patient with the mornings I wasn't there, without you believing in something you couldn't fully see yet." Caleb considered this with the seriousness he brought to important things. "Does that mean I helped? It means you were the reason." Mrs. Dorothy arrived behind Caleb, moving at her own pace with the unhurried dignity of someone who has learned that good things are worth approaching slowly to appreciate properly. She put her hand on Daniel's arm and looked at him for a moment. "Your wife would be very proud," she said. 4 words. They landed in the center of something Daniel had been carrying alone for 3 years, something he had not fully acknowledged needing to hear. He had made a promise in a hospital room and kept it across 1,000 ordinary mornings, and here was someone who saw that, who named it, who gave it the weight it deserved. "Thank you," he said finally, "for everything, for all of it." She waved the gratitude away with the gesture of someone who did not consider what she had given to be extraordinary, which was perhaps the most extraordinary thing about her. Ryan Fletcher found them in the crowd family surrounding him. He shook Daniel's hand and held it a beat longer than a formal handshake required. He said something to Caleb about how Daniel was the calmest person he had ever seen in a crisis, and Caleb nodded with the satisfaction of someone receiving confirmation of something they already knew. The Company B photograph came together without anyone organizing it. 38 graduates in dress uniform families arranged around them naturally, and somehow the people from other companies who had mattered during the 24 weeks found their way into the frame as well. Anna Cole standing beside Kara, the 2 women who had learned each other's capabilities in the pressure of shared scenarios. Ryan Fletcher's arm around Daniel's shoulder as if they had always known each other, which in the way that mattered most they now had. In the center, Daniel Shaw with his hands on Caleb's shoulders, and beside them Mrs. Dorothy Hayes in her blue coat, who stood with the quiet dignity of someone who understood what she had contributed to what she was watching. That evening in their apartment, Daniel and Caleb made spaghetti together. Caleb insisted on stirring the sauce. He stirred too vigorously, and some of it went over the side of the pot. Neither of them treated this as a problem. They ate at their small table and talked about Caleb's Lego spaceship and the Science Museum field trip coming up in March. "Can we afford the field trip?" Caleb asked. The field trip cost $35. 3 months ago, that number would have required calculation. Now it was simply a number one that could be handled without anxiety. "Yes," Daniel said, "we can afford it." The simplicity of Caleb's joy at that answer was something Daniel held in his chest long after dinner was finished and the dishes were washed and the boy was in bed. 3 days after graduation, Daniel reported to South District Precinct for the first day of his probationary assignment. The building was a squat brick structure that had seen better decades, the kind of institutional space that accumulates character through use rather than design. He parked his Civic in the back row the same way he always parked and walked toward the entrance in his duty uniform. Keith Donovan was at the coffee machine in the break room when Daniel came in. Donovan was 58 years old and looked like someone who had been doing difficult things for a long time and had arrived at a sustainable peace with that fact. He had the kind of face that showed its history without apology lines around the eyes, gray at the temples, a steadiness in his posture that was not rigidity, but something closer to roots. He turned when Daniel entered and looked at him for a moment with the recognition of someone who had been expecting this particular person. "You're the Grand View guy," Donovan said. "You told me I still had enough time," Daniel said. Donovan studied him. "I put in to be your training officer," he said. "Greer approved it last week." He handed Daniel a coffee without being asked. "You know why," Daniel waited. "Because I've got 2 years before I retire, and I've spent 30 years learning things the hard way that someone should have told me at the beginning." Donovan picked up his own cup. "I'd rather spend my last 2 years passing that along to someone who might actually use it than working patrol alone and taking it all with me when I leave." The first real call they took together that week was a domestic violence situation, a second-floor apartment with a door standing open and the sounds of a household that had broken into its component pieces. Daniel handled it the way he had been trained methodically, legally, with controlled compassion. He made the arrest. He documented everything correctly. Afterward, Donovan drove them to a diner 3 blocks from the precinct and ordered coffee and said nothing for a while. "Then you know what I got wrong for the first 15 years of this job?" Daniel looked at him across the table. "I was there," Donovan said, "physically present. Every dinner, every school play, every weekend. I was in the chair." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "But I was also still at every call I'd taken that week, still running the decisions I'd made, still carrying the weight of what I'd seen. My body was at the table. My mind was somewhere on a street in this city." He paused. "My kids grew up with a father who was present in every way except the one that mattered most." Daniel said nothing. "I'm not telling you this to be dark about it," Donovan said. "I'm telling you because you have a boy at home who is 8 years old right now. These years, 8, 9, 10, 11, they build the man he becomes, not your salary, not your rank, whether you were actually there, whether when he talked to you, you were listening to him and not to the echo of the last bad call." "How do you separate them?" Daniel asked. "The job and the rest of it." "You don't separate them," Donovan said. "You learn to set them down when you walk through the door. It's a discipline, same as anything else. You practice it. You fail at it sometimes. You practice it again." He looked at Daniel directly. "You still have enough time to get that right. I didn't figure it out until my youngest was already in high school." "You've got 8 years old. That's a gift. Don't let it become a regret." Daniel drove home that evening with Donovan's words sitting beside him like a second passenger. He thought about the parking lot at 4:15 in the morning, about all the mornings he had been physically away from Caleb in order to build something better. He thought about the difference between absence with purpose and absence through distraction. He thought about what it meant to come home and actually be home. He parked the car and went inside and found Caleb at the kitchen table working on homework and sat down across from him and asked about his day and meant the question entirely with all of himself, leaving nothing back at the precinct. Caleb looked up from his worksheet. "You seem different tonight," the boy said. "Good different or bad different?" Caleb considered. "Like you're actually here," he said with the specific perceptiveness of a child who has been paying careful attention into the difference. "I am," Daniel said. "I'm working on always being here." The months that followed moved with the rhythm of a life that had found its proper shape. Daniel learned the streets of South District the way he had learned everything through patient accumulation and honest attention. He learned which residents were reliable, which situations required enforcement, and which required something else, when the law was the full answer and when it was only the beginning of one. Donovan taught by proximity more than instruction. He showed Daniel what 30 years looked like when it was lived correctly, what it cost when it wasn't, and what the difference between those two outcomes came down to in the dailiness of the work. 6 months into the probationary period, a community member named Margaret Owens specifically requested Officer Shaw when she wanted to report a series of car break-ins that had been troubling her neighborhood for weeks. She had information she had not shared with other officers. She trusted Daniel enough to share it with him. The arrest that followed cleared 7 cases. Lieutenant Stone called him into the office. That community trust doesn't happen by accident, Stone said. It happens because you've been showing up, treating people with respect, building something real. Mrs. Owens deserves the credit, Daniel said. She trusted you enough to come forward. Your work created that trust. The financial change was immediate and transforming. Caleb's asthma medication was covered. Bills were paid without the familiar arithmetic of just barely enough. The apartment was the same apartment, but what it contained had changed because what surrounded it had changed. And the difference between surviving and building was the difference between holding your breath and being able to breathe. One evening, driving home after a shift, Caleb in the passenger seat after being picked up from a friend's house, the boy turned and looked at his father with the directness he had always possessed. Dad, yeah, I understand now why you had to be gone so much when you were at the academy. Daniel glanced at him. What do you understand about it? You were building something for us, not just for you. You were making our lives better. Caleb watched the street going past. I was sad when you were gone, but I think I knew it was for something real. It was for you, Daniel said. All of it was for you. Then we built it together, Caleb said, with the simple logic of a child who has been thinking about something carefully and arrived at a conclusion that satisfies him. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said, we did. They drove in comfortable silence through the streets of Columbus, through the neighborhood that Daniel now knew intimately, through the city that had been the backdrop of everything, the cold parking lots and the long shifts, and the years of just barely enough, and now this, the two of them moving through it together, with something that felt for the first time in a long time like forward motion rather than survival. At home, Caleb went to the kitchen table with his backpack and began pulling out homework. Daniel hung up his duty belt and changed out of his uniform and came to sit across from him the way he had learned to do, with all of himself present, nothing held back at the precinct. Dad, Caleb said, not looking up from his math worksheet. Yeah. Can we have pancakes tomorrow with chocolate chips? It's not a special occasion, Daniel said. Caleb looked up. You came home, he said. You always come home. I think that counts. Daniel looked at his son across the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where they had eaten 1,000 breakfasts, where they had run through spelling words in the early dark, where the whole long effort of the past few years had begun, and where it continued to unfold ordinary and precious day by day. Yeah, he said, that counts. That night after Caleb was asleep, Daniel sat on his couch in the dark. The same couch, the same apartment. The badge was on the dresser in the bedroom. The first paycheck stub was in the small box where he kept important documents, next to the academy acceptance letter, next to the photograph from graduation day, next to the hospital bracelet he had kept without quite knowing why, without quite being able to throw it away. He thought about his wife, about the promise, about the specific way she had looked at him when she asked him to make it, trusting him with the most important thing she had, which was the boy sleeping in the next room. He had promised to be enough for both of them. He had not known then what that would require. He had learned. What he had built from the rubble of that loss was not what they had planned together. It was smaller in some ways and harder in most ways, and it had cost things he had not known he would be asked to pay. But Caleb was 8 years old and felt safe and was building a Lego spaceship and collecting rocks in his jacket pockets and asking for chocolate chip pancakes because his father came home. That was what the promise had meant. Not the badge or the salary or the rank. This. The ordinary, precious, hard-won this. Strength, Daniel Shaw understood now, was not what he had demonstrated on a sparring mat in 3 seconds. That had been technique and preparation and the application of specific knowledge. Strength was something else, something quieter and more demanding and less visible. It was the parking lot at 4:15 in the morning when no one was watching, and there was no reward for continuing except the continuation itself. It was the coin on the front sight dropped 40 times before it stayed. It was sitting on the floor of a stranger's apartment and telling the truth because the truth was the only thing that would actually help. It was letting Kara Briggs teach him what he could not teach himself, accepting that help without letting pride make it complicated. It was listening to Keith Donovan in a diner and understanding that presence was not the same as proximity, and then going home and practicing the difference. It was showing up, daily, for the people who depended on you to show up. That was what the 3 seconds on the sparring mat had actually been about. Not the technique, not the outcome, but everything they represented: one visible moment emerging from thousands of invisible hours of preparation, from every morning when a man got up in the dark and did what needed to be done because the alternative was something he could not allow himself to become. He set his alarm for 5 o'clock. In the bedroom, Caleb slept without dreaming, or if he dreamed quietly, the way children sleep when they feel safe. And in the living room, his father let the day be finished. Tomorrow would ask its own questions. He would answer them the same way he had answered every question that had brought him to this point, with preparation and patience and the kind of strength that does not announce itself but simply does not stop. He had made a promise. He was keeping it. He would keep it again tomorrow. That had always been enough. It would be enough again.